Good evening or afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this special program. My name is Rabbi Or Rose, and I teach at Hebrew College in Boston. And I have the merit this evening of serving as the moderator for this program. I want to begin by thanking our co-hosts, Jewish Live, Ritual Well, and of course, the Interfaith Youth Corps, which is our partner in the greater PsalmSeason project that this program is a part of. By way of introduction, I want to share with you a poem that was written by a new friend, a Jerusalem-based poet and liturgist by the name of Alden Salvi. And it was a poem appropriately composed for this time of pandemic and this time of increased Zoom interaction. So I'm going to ask Tom, my associate, to share the poem, and I'll read it to you as an opening kavanah, as an opening intention for the experience that I hope we will share in meaningfully together over the course of the next hour or so. The blessing of faces, a Zoom prayer. So many beautiful faces, so many radiant souls shining forth into our hearts. Look at those eyes, the smiles, the hopes, the fears, the yearning, the questioning, the compassion, the love. Take it in. Take it all in. The humanity, the blessing of faces arrayed before you, the blessing of faces given and received. I'm going to linger just for one moment. So if you want to scroll and see a few more of the beautiful faces that are arrayed on the screen before you, you can actually do so. As my Bubby might have said, such sheina punim, such beautiful faces. So again, I want to welcome everyone. The need for a program like this is self-explanatory, I think. We're living in a time of upheaval. We're living in a time of tremendous pain, dislocation, loss, and serious reckoning about who it is we are individually, communally, nationally, and globally, and who it is that we want and need to be as we move forward. And so I'm honored to have four wonderful guests, each from a different tradition and a different community, here with us this afternoon or evening, depending on your location, to share practices, to share with us something that has sustained them over the last several months or weeks, something that allows them to get up in the morning and to take one step forward, whether it's in their personal lives, their communal lives, whether related to the pandemic or to the more recent social uprising, or to all of the swirling emotions and ideas and thoughts that seem to just envelop us in the course of an hour and certainly in a day. So the way that we're going to organize our time is that we're going to have two practice sharings, and then we'll pause for some Q&A, and you can ask questions or comment using the chat box, and I'll try and pick a few that seem like they can be bundled together. And then we'll do a second round with the other two contributors, presenters, and then we'll have a conversation. And given some of the things that I've learned about Zoom, we certainly will not go much beyond 6:15 because there is such a thing as Zoom fatigue, even with the world's best presenters and the most beautiful practices. So we'll try and keep to time. So I want to introduce our first presenter, and I'll introduce each of them before they share so that you have in heart and mind who it is the person that is sharing, who it is that is offering with vulnerability and courage something that matters to them and something that you might consider as a gift, as an offering. So the first of our presenters is Reverend Dr. Leslie Callahan, and she is the first female pastor of the 119-year-old St. Paul's Baptist Church located in the heart of Philadelphia. A native of Gary, West Virginia, Dr. Callahan experienced her first Christian education and formation at Apostolic Temple Church, try and say that 5 times fast, where she developed an enduring love for Jesus Christ and for Christ's body, that is the church. Having experienced her call to ministry at an early age, Dr. Callahan began the public proclamation of the gospel at age 19. Committed to education, Dr. Callahan earned the Bachelor of Arts in Religion from Harvard University, Radcliffe, a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary, and the Doctor of Philosophy degree in religion from Princeton University. And her research interests include religious history in the United States, particularly independent African-American Christianity and Pentecostal studies. With that formal bio out of the way now, Leslie, let me just say thank you in advance for all that you do in the church, in the streets, and it's a joy to be with you. So we are in your able hands.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. You might see me kind of giggling, and that is because not only have I become adept at Zoom, it feels like I Zoom all day, every day, but my 7-year-old daughter has become adept at Zoom bombing, the most delightful sort. And so she's off to the side playing at exactly the moment when I can't sort of attend to her playing. And today I'm amused by it. I'm not always amused, but today I'm definitely amused by it. Thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of the PsalmSeason in general. I want to thank my friend Paul Rauschenbusch, who put me in touch with you and helped me to find another community. So let me, for the time that's mine, let me just say, there she is. I would say that I don't come from a tradition where of high ritual. Our practices tend to be much more kind of in the world and certainly communal. You've already heard in my bio that I am a Baptist pastor, and that hold on one second. Come on, Belle. Mommy. I know, it's okay. I'll answer later. I'll check my messages later. I can't answer it right now, babe. I want to answer. Go right ahead. Yeah. My phone rang. Okay, I'm sorry. Can you stop Zoom bombing now, please? Okay. So we're our tradition is much more. We're in the low church tradition. We're not sort of ritual heavy, but the gathering, of course, is at the center of our life together. And when we began to talk with the leadership of the congregation about how we would attend to the reality, even before we were in a stay-at-home order, it was clear to us that we could not gather safely. And so what I said to our congregation is there will be lots of things that we cannot do that feel essential, that are essential. But let's figure out how to do more of what we can do. And so this all felt theoretical at the beginning of March when I was saying it, but over the course of the last 5 months, it has really been critical, not only to the well-being of the congregation itself, which I feel like is doing pretty well all in all, but also to my sense of connection and personal well-being. And so, excuse me, we did two things that I will share as that actually are practices, but are practices that are consistent with our tradition and our way of kind of being in the world. And so the first thing we do is we have a weekly call from our deacons, who are our lay spiritual leaders. And each of the deacons is assigned a certain number of families based on geographic location, because before the pandemic, they would go visit people who were ill. And so we try to match people with the area in the tri-state region where that they lived in too, so that their visiting wasn't onerous. But we've asked them to reach out to their congregants once a week, and sometimes it's just to check in. Sometimes we have specific prompts that are related to things that are going on in the city, in the world. How are you feeling about? Do you need? The first couple of weeks, it was, do you need anything? Do you need us to get your groceries? Do you have the technology that's necessary to interact? Do you need anything? After a couple of weeks, we also started to ask, do you have anything you want to offer? Because we realized that it is as critical for us to be able to give of what we have as it is to be able to access what we need. And so over the course, we continue to have these weekly check-ins from the lay leadership. I wasn't really prepared for how meaningful it would be for me to get the call. It wasn't a surprise, clearly. We had talked about, this is what we're going to do. And then my phone rang. And of course, as a community leader, your phone ringing, you don't know what it's going to be. Phone rang, I recognized the caller. It was one of our church officers. And when she said, "Hi, I'm just calling to check on you and Bella. I want to see how you are," I was stunned by how meaningful that was. The second thing that we decided to do, again, along the lines of, there are many things we cannot do, let's do what we can and more of it, is we had been using Zoom for Bible study kind of off and on for at least a couple or 3 years. So we already had a number. We started to do a check-in prayer call every weekday evening at 6 o'clock. And there's a kind of core group of maybe 30, 35 people. About 20 or 25 come on every day. There are another maybe 15 or 20 folks who come in and out. Maybe they check in once a week or twice a week, or maybe even once every few weeks. And that also changes, like the sense of it changes from day to day. Like one day, the person who was leading the call, who's a recent transplant to Philadelphia, said, when we get out, when we're allowed to go out again, where do you think I should go? Like, I haven't had a chance to really see the city. And so that was just kind of fun. Sometimes it's, what do you miss? Sometimes it's, what have you taken on? Sometimes it's, what do you want to get out of this? And even that part about it, again, back to the practice side in community, the fact that it's not the same from day to day is itself important. And so, and again, these are my ideas in large part, but the way that they help to sustain me is remarkable. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And at some point, I may push my luck and ask you if you'll actually lead us in a prayer, something that you might do with your folks either daily or weekly. And then I have a few other questions about what life has been like for you in terms of your own prayer life and the life of a preacher. You're a very powerful preacher. So we'll come back to that, but thank you for those sharings, both the communal and the personal, particularly about the reciprocal nature and the surprise of being held by the community and by the deacons is something important for many of us who are in leadership roles to remember. So Casper, you are next. Let me introduce you. I'll be brief so that you have as much time as you need to actually share. Casper de Kuile is the author of The Power of Ritual and the co-host of the award-winning podcast, Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. He is also a Ministry Innovation Fellow at Harvard Divinity School and the co-founder of the startup Sacred Design Lab, a research and design consultancy working to create a culture of belonging and becoming. He co-authored How We Gather, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, Vice, The Atlantic, and the Washington Post. Without further ado, Casper, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Or. That was plenty of ado, so I'm glad I'm glad we got to the other side. And thank you to Reverend Dr. Callahan. It's a beautiful that set us off in just the right way. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So good to be with you this afternoon, and so appreciate all of you being here. I too wanted to share a practice that was communal in nature. We've got two for communal. Hopefully we'll have some personal practices joining us later. But the practice I wanted to share was a practice that I have with my two teammates at Sacred Design Lab, which is our covenant, our practice of covenant. And I know many of you will be familiar with covenant practices. So this is one expression of that. It's certainly not the definitive one. But for me, it has been one of the real stabilizing forces in this time of rapid and uncomfortable change. And so having this anchor as a weekly commitment and a weekly practice has been enormously, to use my colleague Sue's word, stabilizing. So what that looks like for us is, as I said, we're a team of 3 people. We're remotely distributed. So I'm in Brooklyn. My other 2 colleagues are on the West Coast, and then one just outside of DC. And we've learned when working at a distance that you need extra effort. Just like Leslie was just describing, you need extra systems to build in that sense of personal connection as well as kind of professional collaboration. And so what that looks like for us is we spent every year we get together. Of course, this was pre-COVID, but we've done this 3 years now. And we spend a whole day talking about how do we want to be together. So this isn't what do we want to do together in terms of our shared work, although we have those conversations, of course, as well. But it's how do we want to be in relationship with each other? What do we want for one another and for ourselves in how we are in the world? And that goes really, for us, beyond just our professional lives. It means how we show up at home, how we show up as a citizen. So we spend a good deal of time talking about it. And then we wrote up those commitments in the sort of poetic language. And I'm glad to share this after the call. I can share it with Tom or if folks are curious. But essentially, it's kind of written in aspirational language. And then what we do at every team meeting is we read it aloud in a sort of litany. So each paragraph, one of us will read it out loud, just over Zoom, like we're doing now. And it feels a little strange at first to be reading out loud words that you've written and that you all know. But over time, it starts to kind of become ingrained. And you start to recognize phrases and even use phrases with one another as shorthand. And after reading it, which kind of orients us again to the way in which we want to be in the world, we then reflect, where did we fulfill our covenant? You know, where have we really lived into it? And we can celebrate one another and ourselves for doing that. And then also we reflect, where did we fall short? You know, what's a place where we didn't fulfill the commitment? Because in our approach to covenant, we're always failing somewhere. You know, it's not perfection, but it's about constantly reorienting towards that way of being in the world. So for example, one of the phrases we had in a previous iteration of our covenant was right speech. It really inspired by the Buddhist teachings. And for us, it was an opportunity to remind ourselves, oh, you know, I didn't do that properly. I did a little eye roll, or maybe I was at this event and I made a snide comment, you know, while I was sitting next to a friend. And it's not an opportunity for kind of haranguing and for shaming. We actually put in the covenant, you know, we don't use shame as a strategy. But it is an opportunity to constantly come into the mirror of how we want to be as a team, how we want to show up in the world, and to look at ourselves and say, well, how are we doing? For us, covenant is always a living document. So as I said, we review it every year. And there are some things that once that, you know, you've done them so often, you kind of don't need to say it anymore. And it's an opportunity to lean into something new. So we're always thinking about how does this document live and grow? And we have, I think one of the things maybe that's best about the covenant as a practice is it isn't just something held by the three of us, but we have a wonderful mentor and elder, Sister Carol Zinn, the Catholic nun, who is our covenant keeper. And so at the very end of the covenant, we say, you know, if we would fall into a relational, you know, dispute, or we need witness and accompaniment, we all know and we've all agreed that Sister Carol will come and be with us before we disband, or before some big decisions are made. And the loveliest bit of that is that we know we're in her prayers, and so we know that Sister Carol is praying for us and for our covenant, which is it just adds, I would say, a sort of a layer of care, and also a layer of accountability to that structure. And so what it's meant for me is that when we have our team meetings, it isn't just a time of getting things done, but that we've really set aside an hour every week where we do a kind of soul check-in, you know, how are you really doing, what's going on? And then we read the covenant together and reflect on it. And we always rotate the responsibility of facilitating and the person who offers that initial question. The final thing I'll say is that having something like a team covenant offers you the opportunity to say the hard thing before it grows into a sort of like terrifying thing. And so we explicitly make space for like, hey, when we were in that meeting together and you were describing our work in this way, that just didn't quite sit right with me. Can we talk about that? Or I'm a little worried about X, like, can we, you know, A, B, and C. And it just takes so much of the stress and anxiety out of a team system that it, for me, has become not just a team, but a real, you know, a loving community, and two of my dearest friends as well as colleagues. So I shared that expression of covenant as one way to think about where we find connection in this moment, because I think more and more of us are actually finding community and connection in the workplace, which offers up all sorts of ethical questions that we can talk about. But I think this is a tool that is both boundaried and appropriate, as well as giving space for that deeper sense of connection and orientation around values that I think a lot of us are looking for at work. So I will pause there and look forward to questions and conversations about this and the other practices.
Thank you very much, Casper. And I don't know if you have the text handy with you, but perhaps in a couple of minutes you can just read us a few lines, since it is written poetically as a litany, just to give us a taste of the language. But before doing that, I'm just going to pause, and I'm going to share a melody, because we need to both talk about and theorize and reflect, but also do. So I invite you to sing with me. I'm going to share a nigun, which is a wordless melody. And in my experience, it's one of the most powerful ways of trying to open ourselves to the spirit and to ground and to center ourselves. As I often say in my classes, particularly when I'm teaching folks from different religious, cultural, ethnic, racial backgrounds, part of the beauty of a nigun is that it does not require any theological or dogmatic commitment. You can fill the vessel of your body and of your voice with your own kavanot, with your own intentions. And we'll sing, breathe, and then I have a few questions for Leslie and Casper, and then we'll hear from Judith and Amichai. Ni la 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 Aelai, 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 la 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 ay la 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 ay la la ay la 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 I 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 la 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 I la la I la la I la la I la la. Thank you. So Leslie, I want to come back to you. And I telegraphed some of my questions, but let me ask you, if I dare, tell us something about your own prayer life over the last few months, in addition to what you're doing in terms of facilitation for the community and with the community. But what does that look like daily, weekly, monthly? Have there been practices, statements, chants, words, meditations that have taken on particular importance? Are there other things that you've let go of, or that once were particularly compelling you continue to do, but without as much oomph for whatever reason in this upside down time?
Oh, so that, I mean, I think that the answer to that question is it waxes and wanes. I would say, yeah, and that probably was true before the pandemic too. I feel like for the last 5 months or so, I mean, I especially before school, the first couple of weeks with my daughter home, and when we were sort of at the very beginning, and I was trying to figure out how to teach first grade. And there were some real particular reasons why I had never become a elementary school teacher that were especially apparent, even more to her than to me. So, I mean, I spent a lot of time really having more kind of God have mercy sorts of prayers. Less articulate, more desperate. Spent a lot of time in the Psalms, interestingly. And in fact, preached a lot about the Psalms because that's where I was spending my week, and was really trying to say as much to myself as to the church that it's really okay not to be in a space like you can say it all, the full range. And it did feel like I was kind of going through the full range of emotions and sentiments, both religiously and emotionally. And you know, the cycle was like a lot shorter. You know, sort of every week it was way down, not so much way up, but you know, it was very difficult. So, and it changes sometimes music is really very important to me in terms of my own, it's always been important to me as a way of prayer. Singing has always been important to me as a way of sort of expressing my own kind of heart. And so a lot of my devotional life is me playing the piano badly and singing. And interestingly, like playing, and that had started before the pandemic began. It intensified during the pandemic. And what I can say about it is that it's still bad, but it isn't as bad as it was when we started, right? So there's been a space of growth, and I've learned more about how to create the sounds that I want to hear and to express. And that's also been helpful in that wordless space. Sometimes it's just a minor chord.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I appreciate it. So now, of course, you're on the hook for a song. It doesn't have to be a piano, but I'll let you think for a moment. I know you're quick on your feet, but you can,
okay.
you can think for a few moments. And I'll turn attention to Casper, and then we'll come back to you. Casper, you decided, or some higher power decided, that this was the season in which you were going to release a new book. I believe it is your first book.
That's true. Yeah, I should have a.
This is the best time to do it or the worst time to do it, but of course, important to us is that you've dedicated all of this time and energy on the power of ritual, which is the title. So take us through the process of sharing this in the midst of the pandemic. If you want, you can also share with us something about the creation and the writing of the book, but I'm very curious, what has it been like to try and share the wisdom that you've gathered, that you've gleaned, and offer it to people online mostly, and in the midst of so much that is strange and difficult?
Yeah, it's been a very, it's certainly not what I was planning. But, you know, what's so interesting, Or, is that on the one hand, of course, you know, never a worse time to try and engage with people in conversation and to be out there and meet and talk about a book. But on the other hand, there is such a large consensus that we don't want to necessarily go back to how it was, that there was so much wrong, whether it was the criminal justice system, whether it was the economy, whether it was the way in which we're forcing people to work, parent, or the sustainability crisis that we're in. There's so much that we know that we don't want to return to. And I think more and more of us are embracing, as best we can, this moment to reimagine how we want to live. And so I experience this moment as a real turn towards meaning and a turn towards questions of ultimate concern. And so there's been a real resonance, you know, and I'm grateful that my book can play a small part in that, but I think a real resonance for spaces like this to think about, well, how do we want to live? And it's been a real joy, honestly, to use technologies like Zoom to invite folks to try something new. I think our risk the barriers for things going horribly wrong are much lower, because if it's a disaster, you just close the laptop and you walk away, right? So that our tolerance for risk, for trying new practices, for participating in new communities, there's actually a lot more interest and openness and desire for a life of meaning and spirituality. And that for me is extremely exciting. And of course, we try some things, they don't work. We try other things and they do work. But I've been doing, I ran for about 2.5 months, a weekly online choir where we did what you just let us in, or I would teach a song and my husband would join us, although I'm not going to reveal that I sing now, because of course Ora's going to make me sing. So I should have learned from Leslie. But just that sense of folks joining from all around the world to sing with us. With my podcast that you mentioned, Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, it's a community of tens of thousands of people who do sacred readings with the Harry Potter books rather than a traditional religious text. But we just hosted a digital summer camp where we had over 800 people participate in practicing Lectio Divina and Chavruta, as well as, you know, cake baking contests and costume contests. And but, you know, it was a deeply emotional and spiritually, I hope, fulfilling experience for folks as they were leaning into new practices and trying new things. So, you know, within the little story of this book, there's a much bigger picture about, you know, how the shape of our spiritual lives is changing, both because of the new technologies that we have and, of course, because of the coronavirus.
So I want to ask you one more question before I return to Leslie, and then, of course, turn to Judith and Amichai. But if you could just share with folks the backdrop for the book, because you've been at work for several years now on trying to think and craft and weave and gather folks who might not otherwise feel like they belong or are interested in more conventional religious ritual and community. And so tell us something about that experience. I mean, even in your brief description, it's a very eclectic one. Chavruta, Lectio Divina, etc.
Yes.
And if you could also just say a word about particularity and universality, because you know, I think this question of permeability, of groundedness, of specificity, but also of permeability, as one of my teachers, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, put it, is an important one. And so say a few words about that journey. I think it would be really powerful for folks.
Yeah, just for some context. So I grew up in England without a specific religious background, but very influenced by my education in the Waldorf Steiner school system, which is very nature-based and within a Christian kind of liturgical calendar, has lots and lots of ritual, very strong community, lots of singing. Growing up in England, you can't escape the influence of the Anglican Church. So, you know, Compline and beautiful church music is part of my history as well. And then my family, both my parents are Dutch. So a real sense of connection to Dutch traditions has always been part of my spiritual life. So all of that is to say, I came into the world a bit of a mongrel. And I think in that way have always felt, and then as a gay man who felt very excluded from kind of traditional religious institutions, always felt myself most drawn to the kind of the place outside institutional religion. Well, the joke's on me because I ended up in divinity school and now spend my days working with both religious institutions and secular organizations, thinking about what spiritual life in the 21st century looks like, especially for younger people. You know, 40% of millennials today, and the number is probably higher for Gen Zs in the US, don't affiliate with any religious traditions. Now, very quickly, we usually assume that that means that they're atheists or they're not interested in religion. And that's not at all true. It's a much, you know, it's about 6% who describe themselves as atheists. That whole big chunk in the middle are interested, are curious, are open, are learning, are seeking, but often feel that their own kind of authentic expression of spirituality might not fit within an institutional home. I don't want to say that's true, but that's how they experience it. And so, you know, if you go out there and say, hello, I'm from synagogue A, or I'm from church B, often the conversation is already shut down immediately. And so my work really thinks about what are strategies that supports building deep community, building authentic spirituality in places that maybe religious institutions can't access. And my experience is that when people feel safe, when they feel that it's relevant and interesting and relational, people go all in. And so the podcast is one example of, you know, people come because they love the Harry Potter books. It's a place of comfort. It's a story of meaning and connection for them, but they stay for the spiritual practices. They stay for the community that's built. You know, we've got over 100 local groups around the world that get together and study text together using these Jewish and Christian practices, which if you'd have told me that, I would have never believed you. Which brings us to that second question that you asked about the kind of mixing or the braiding of traditions and practices. And there's all sorts of real questions that are that demand a longer answer, but I will say, if we think that religion has traveled through time, through pneumatic tubes where people didn't interact with one another's traditions, we are fools. Religion has always been intertwined, changing, influencing one another, shifting, innovating, responding to culture and technology. And I see this as just the latest expression of that. And, you know, for more and more people, they're born in interfaith homes. For more and more people, their partner is from a different tradition or different culture. And so the way in which people are constructing their spiritual lives is not something to be feared. I think, but something to be embraced. And so my approach is always to affirm what people are experiencing and interested in, and then to invite them to learn about the tradition and the depth and the history as a way to resource their life today. So that's one way in which I think about it, and that we try to practice in our work.
Thank you. And I think we have at least 1, 2, or 3 more programs in the works that I could imagine, based on that question, the tension of universality and particularity, of openness and closeness, of, again, what my teacher called permeability, and what that looks like in communities that are historically minority communities or majority communities.
Absolutely.
Questions of power, etc. So more conversation to come in the weeks and the months ahead, after you take a vacation. Leslie, I've given you grace long enough. Can you hit us with a prayerful song before I call on our other 2 guests? Just unmute yourself and
okay, let's see.
Whatever comes up.
So the week I preached about this, I preached about kind of the space of desperation. I closed the sermon with a chorus that we sang when I was growing up. The gist of what I was saying in the sermon is that I don't know how to do all the things that this moment calls for, but that I do come from a tradition where people talked about what it means to wait on God. And so I sang this chorus: I will trust in the Lord. I will trust in the Lord. I will trust in the Lord until I die.
Thank you. Beautiful. Judith Simmer Brown, thank you for being with us in a different time zone. And let me just say a few words about who you are. You've been a teacher and a mentor of mine and a role model for a long time. So I'm happy to share you with all these other folks. Acharya Judith Simmer Brown, PhD, is Distinguished Professor of Contemplative Religious Studies at Naropa University, where she has taught as a founding faculty member since 1978, my 4th birthday. She studied at Cornell College, University of British Columbia, and Walden University. She's practiced Tibetan Buddhism for 45 years and is an Acharya, a senior Dharma teacher of the Shambhala Buddhist lineage. And she is a distinguished and prolific author, teacher, meditation leader, and a supreme menschlich human being. So when you are ready, Judith, we are with you.
Thank you so much, Or, and I'm very honored to be here and delighted to be with these new colleagues and delighted to see you again, Or. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about my community. I have a community of around 10,000 members from all over the world, primarily North America, Europe, South America, and some in Asia. And there is one large community in South Africa as well. So one of the things that has happened with the pandemic is that being able to be online together, we've been able to really join together in practice sessions internationally. And a practice that has been very dear to me during much of my life has become very dear for my community in the last few months. A practice which many of the people in my community have not practiced before. And so I wonder if I could have my PowerPoint, just because I want to show some, this is the practice of white TＡRA. So Tom, if I tell you to advance the slide, if you'll go to the next one. White TARA is a sadhana practice, and I just wanted people who are not familiar with Buddhist practices. Many people think that Buddhists just practice formless meditation, But in Tibetan Buddhism, we do a lot of ritual practice. And the sadhana practices are practices working with meditational deities who are not truly existent. They're not like gods and goddesses, but meditational deities who crystallize and hold the power of the enlightened lineages to pass their power and their encouragement on to practitioners. These are practices that use visualization and mantra, postures and gestures, and they evoke in us the fundamental nature that we often forget that we have, our own Buddha nature, our own basic goodness as we talk about it in my lineage. So these practices, sadhana practices, this is what I'd like to share with you today. So Tom, the next slide. So White Tara is a bodhisattva, not historically based. She is a visionary being who holds the blessings of compassion practices from all the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist lineages. The practice that I do goes back to the 6th or 7th century in Indian Buddhism. The story is that the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, who's known for his ability to help people who are suffering, said that he thought he had been doing a good job. And then he got a glimpse of the world and realized how profound the suffering was. And he fell on the ground weeping. And from his eyes, as tears fell, from one eye, green Tara arose, from the other eye, white Tara arose. And they said, "Don't worry, we will help you alleviate suffering." And so white Tara is the practice that I do. It's a very powerful practice in Himalayan Buddhism. And the name Tara itself is she who carries us over from fear and suffering into peace. So Tara is often called the savioress. So the next slide. So the benefits of white Tara practice are perfect for the pandemic. White Tara is especially associated with long life and good health, alleviating disease physically and alleviating mental suffering, any kind of emotional suffering. She's also associated with bringing harmony to the world, to families, to communities, and to nations. She's associated with soothing stress and disruption and trauma, and she offers healing to all beings who are hurt or wounded. She's especially known for relieving fear. So on to the next slide. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of the iconography of white Tara. This is from a drawing done by the 17th Karmapa, who is the head of one of the lineages that I practice. He is a millennial himself, and this is his own personal drawing of white Tara. Tara is depicted as translucent and white like moonlight. She has 7 eyes, the 2 normal eyes, and then an eye vertical in her forehead, on the palms of her hands and the soles of her feet. And this symbolizes her ability to witness suffering, to see suffering in all of its detail everywhere in the world. Her right hand is extended in generosity. Her left hand is raised, holding the stem of a blue lotus, and pointing out that as we do this practice, this is a practice that can take us and all beings to realization. She sits in meditative posture, and she wears royal robes to show that anyone who has compassion is considered a noble being. So the next one. So today what I'm going to do is share with you the white Tara mantra and invite you that if you'd like to join me with this mantra to get a feel of the white Tara practice. This is the mantra in Tibetan language, and it reads Om TÄRÄ TÜ TÄRÄ Svaha. And when we do white Tara practice, we visualize ourselves as white Tara. We don't visualize her as separate from us, but we ourselves in our basic nature are compassionate beings. And we visualize ourselves in this white female form with a hollow body full of light, radiating white light in all directions. As we begin the practice, we first visualize suffering in any form that we see it, from COVID-19 or any kind of suffering, we allow ourselves to really take in the suffering of the world. And then from our heart centers, we send out white light to any being who is suffering. And as the light touches them, they feel in some way relieved of physical suffering, of illness, of fear, of mental suffering, of conflict of any kind. And so as I begin the White Tara mantra, if you could imagine yourself, even if you can't see anything else, that white light is coming from your heart, radiating all throughout the world, touching any beings who you can think of at this moment who are suffering. And you could either listen to the mantra or say it with me. I'm singing it in an ancient tune that I received from a yogini who has passed now, who was a major White Tara practitioner. I'm going to do a sip of water first. Om Tare Tu Re Svaha. 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 And I would continue this mantra for some time when I'm leading practice. The mantra itself means carry me over from physical suffering, from psychological suffering, from fear, and from confusion. And just repeating, asking TＡRA, please carry me over from physical suffering, psychological suffering, fear, and confusion. And I wish that to all the other beings who I touch. So you can end the slideshow at this point. So I just wanted to say that this practice is one that I have done for many years, and only a small number of our community have been doing this practice in the past. But since March, I started leading, there's been a White Tara group in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, for some time, but I started leading this practice online, and hundreds and hundreds of people come every week and join me on Sundays for White Tara practice. People from Eastern Europe, from Taiwan, from Brazil, and Peru and Argentina, from all over North America, all over Europe as well. And we have simultaneous translation of this practice for people in different language groups. So it's become a practice that has brought a great deal of relief and calming peacefulness to many people in my community. I know it's being done by Tibetan Buddhists all over the world. It's probably the most often done practice related to the pandemic among Tibetan Buddhist communities everywhere. So I'm very happy to be able to share the mantra with you today, and just to give a feel for the kind of way the compassion practices, there are formless compassion practices we do, but this is one that is a deity compassion practice that brings the blessing of centuries of compassion practitioners and sharing it to anyone who's suffering. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Judith. Thank you for sharing so openly and beautifully and providing us with context for what it is that you're doing and sharing with people all over the world. When I come back to you in a few minutes after we hear from Amichai, I would love also to hear your thoughts about what it's like sharing that practice with non-Buddhists.
Yes.
and how we might approach it, and questions of iconography and idolatry and so forth and so on
Yes.
that tend to emerge, whether consciously or not, whether strongly or in more relaxed ways, but about the interchange across traditions.
Very happy to talk about that later. Yes.
Yeah. You have some experience dealing with these issues.
Yes, I do.
Amichai, are you with us?
I am, my friend.
Hi,
Good afternoon.
it's nice to see you.
You too, Or. It's been lovely to hear and learn and meditate.
Good. So let me introduce you formally, because if I did it informally, I'd embarrass both of us. Rabbi Amichai Lau-Lavie is the founding spiritual leader of Shul NYC and the creator of Storahtelling Incorporated, an Israeli-born Jewish educator, writer, and performance artist. He received his rabbinical education and ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in 2016. Rabbi Amichai is a member of the Global Justice Fellowship of the American Jewish World Service, a founding member of the Jewish Emergent Network, and serves on the faculty of the Reboot Network. Amichai is a delightful, kind, creative human being and has been a dear friend and someone that I've learned a great deal from in my own journey as a rabbi. So I'm really honored and pleased that you'll be sharing with us.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much. It's been very moving and deeply grounding just to be here to hear Leslie sing and teach, and my friend Casper, and to sit with White TＡRA. What a treat this afternoon. I'm here in what's known as the Jewish Alps in the Catskills. I came for a few days from where I've spent most of quarantine in my home in Harlem to visit my friend Julian, who lives up here and whose father passed a week ago. So to echo what Casper was talking about, how we're finding new ways to reinvent rituals. My friend Julian was not a millennial, nevertheless created sort of an alternative Shiva and a way to invite friends into his Zoom and his home and to hold space for grief and for moving through it. So I got to both be here with him and in the trees, which is a treat, and to share with you some thoughts about the other ways myself and my community, I believe, have renovated rituals and found ways to rise. Right? Do you want me to focus on anything specific? You're muted, or? Shocking.
I cannot believe I just did that after 5 months. I would love for you to share a little bit about your Psalms practice specifically, because I know that it's meant a lot to you. So
Okay.
we can bring it up, and just a few minutes, a taste of what it is and why it's been meaningful to you and perhaps to your community as well.
Yeah, maybe before you share the psalm, actually, let me just give it context for a moment.
Yeah.
Because hearing now Leslie, Casper, and Judith, I want to sort of frame it in this context, if I may briefly. My father, who died 5 years ago, left me with a very strange advice many years ago, which was about praying the afternoon prayer that Orthodox Jews pray. And as a child, we kind of did, honestly. It wasn't like one of those must-haves, but you still did it. Most people assume that my father, though giving me advice when I was 12 years old, didn't really keep the afternoon prayer, the mincha prayer, religiously. But after he passed and I needed to say Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, my choice was to honor his memory by sticking to the afternoon prayer and doing my own way of saying Kaddish or meditating, and then inviting my community once a week for a phone Kaddish. So 5 years ago, we started holding quorum online for people who are mourners, whether they're Jewish, not, whether they know the words or not, to have grief space and to say Kaddish. I did it for the year of mourning for him, and then the baton passed on, and this is still going on every Thursday at noon. And I'm mentioning it because what happened in mid-March with my community is we were thinking about immediately in mid-March, how do we pivot to what's needed? And what came to me was my father's teaching to pay attention to the afternoon service, which is short. It's called mincha, which means the gift or the present. And it's really about being present. And being as I am in the Flexidox domain, it wasn't about adhering to the exact texts of the prayer book, but giving people a space for contemplation, to connect to each other, to meditate, to sing, to chant the mourner's prayer as the lists grew day by day, and to end with a healing prayer. So we created a very everybody-friendly space called the Soul Spa. Every day at 3 p.m., I see a bunch of our Soul Spas here on this call, alongside many of my important teachers. And Soul Spa ran every day at 3 p.m. I ran it every day with colleagues and friends and teachers across faith and denominations for 108 days into the last day of June, for May 14th. And then we went to 3 times a week with folks in the community holding space. And we're going to start again with a daily on August 20th, which is the first day of the last month of the year, Elul, in the beginning of the period of reckoning and repair. And what's been so amazing about the daily Soul Spa is really it's become an opportunity for me, a daily grounding, to sit quietly and know that I'm sitting, to do it with 30 to 50 people who committed daily to show up, and on Shabbat and sometimes holidays, hundreds, and to just practice the age-old advice of our ancestors of reinventing the ways of reconnecting. Lots of people in our community are not believers in God. You know, as Casper said, it's not necessarily atheists, but looking for other ways to connect. So we are God optional, and everything gets translated as poetry that speaks to who we are as souls. And people have connected from all over the world and continue to. So we're redefining what is community, how rituals work, and using the old to really have grounding in the now, as so many of us are doing right now. Soul Spa for us is a discovery. Out of the narrow place, a wide place of presence has shown up. And one of the ways we've been able to bring liturgy into Soul Spa is by looking at key psalms from the tradition and retranslating them again as poetry for now, for people of so many different axes, into what is prayer or religion or the divine. So I want to share with you briefly, if I have like 3 minutes, to share one psalm that is a work in process that I'm sure many of you across faiths are familiar with, that I think has a meditation technique built in. And it's about the art of weaning from what no longer serves us. So I'd love to share with you Psalm 131, or if you can share the text. And I could say that I know how to sing this, but then I'll be busted by singing it, so I won't. But I promise you by next time, I'll learn how to play this on the guitar, because I'm learning guitar now, because, you know, it's COVID. But I'll just read the Hebrew, and then I'll take you down to my translation. It's a bit of chutzpah, but bear with me. Here's the psalm. Shir HaMa'alot LeDavid, Adonai lo gava libi, velo ramu einai, velo hilachti bigdolot uvniflaot mimeni, im lo shiviti, ודוממתי נפשי, כגמול עלי אמו, כגמול עלי נפשי. יחל ישראל אל אדוני מעתה ועד עולם. So the New Standard Version of the Bible translation is here in front of you. And if you scroll down a little bit, there's another translation from the Jewish Publication Society, 1982. And then below is my work in process. So I just want to look at those two with you, just to show what I think, why there's a technique here. A song of ascents of David. O Lord, my heart is not proud, nor my look haughty. I do not aspire to great things or to what is beyond me. But I have taught myself to be contented, like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child am I in my mind. O Israel, wait for the Lord now and forever. So it's this weaning metaphor that I want to focus on briefly, that I've been coming back to again and again as a way of a meditative, contemplative practice. This is Psalm 131. And the weaning, of course, is such a rich and important psycho-spiritual and embodied moment of our becoming. Rumi has the famous poem, little by little wean yourself. This is the gist of what I have to say. So here's my take, and there's a change there in the grammar, and happy to discuss this with others later. But it flips the order of what this poem is about, I believe. A Song of Ascent by David. I call out to the divine. My heart has not been elevated. My eyes would not have seen beyond. I would not have been walking the grand paths of greater wonder had I not paused to balance, to silence my soul. As a weaned child upon its mother, my soul is weaned upon me. You who wrestle, yearn for the divine, now and always. And so the flip here in the Hebrew is that it's not but I have taught myself, but had I not taught myself. My heart had not been so full. My eyes would not have seen so many wonders beyond what's here and now. I would not have been walking the grand paths of wonder and wisdom had I not done the Hebrew art of shiviti, which is in this verse. Shiviti is to do what Judith just taught us to do. And what happened when Leslie sang and we were completely focused. It's to say, here I am, shiviti. I'm in balance, I'm focused, I'm aligning, I'm meditating, silencing my soul so that I can be weaned from the mind, perhaps, the incessant thought, the me that was. And so my soul is weaned upon me, although you could also read it, I am weaned upon my soul, but leave that for next time. There's a weaning happening, and in this place I can be. And so this weaning from my fears and my anxieties from the past with how things should be, that's how the prayer should be, that's how it must be. I'm like, no, let's just wean. And the sitting, the daily sitting, my morning alignment and now my daily afternoon has become a gift for me and I think for many of us. And it's a no-brainer. That's what I think religion is sitting on. Those moments of shiviti, of balance, of emptying and weaning to be present. And if you can unshare, I will say that I did not share an image here, although the iconography is rich. Think about a baby weaned in their mother's arms. That is the imagery we're seeing here. And I will say that I spent once upon a time an entire day in the Prado in Madrid, going from one Jesus in the arms of his mother to the other, seeing which ones were weaned and which ones were not. And there is a whole school of thought about that. But the icon of the child in the mother's arms, the earthling in the mothers of earth, of Gaia, of Havaya, Jesus in the hands of Mary, soul weaned upon existence as we grow. There's something about that image that is very beguiling. And the practice of the daily sit, this psalm is one of the gifts that I am so honored to share and hope to have more time to unpack with all of you.
Thank you very much, Amichai. So Judith, I want to come back to you and then we'll ping pong and share with Amichai and the other panelists as well. But tell me what it is like, what it was like even this time to share your practice with non-Buddhists, knowing that Hebrew College is one of the sponsors and iconography and such can make people a little uncomfortable, and how you understand that process of sharing. And this question, as I said before, which our mutual teacher and friend Reb Zalman used to describe as, the question of permeability.
Yes. Wonderful question, and probably too big a question to answer fully. I was very aware I was coming into an Abrahamic space where the notion of a meditational deity would be a hard one to convey. And I saw on the chat that someone is asking if this is idolatry. And it's fascinating because Buddhism as a tradition is so firmly against the notion of an external God, the notion that the divine is completely immanent in our human experience, that Buddhists would be equally concerned about whether it's idolatry. So you could say that it's a common concern. But there is, I think many people have misunderstandings of Buddhism, of either thinking that Buddhists just sit and follow their breath all the time. But because the topic of this program was especially about ritual, I wanted to bring in a taste of a ritual that has been very important in my community during this time. And we have lots of rituals. Reb Zolman loved all the rituals that he was exposed to being at Naropa University. We have endless ritual practices, and all the practices end with dissolving back into emptiness. We start with emptiness. The deities are visualized as powerful embodiments of qualities that we aspire to. And at the end, we always dissolve them back into emptiness as well. And so you could say Buddhism flirts with theism and non-theism constantly, knowing that there's enormous power in all of that, and recognizing that what we're evoking is something that is an aspect of our own experience that we've lost and need to reconnect with in order to find wholeness. So I find very often when I'm in dialogue settings, there is perhaps unfamiliarity in the audience that Buddhism doesn't have an external notion of God. And then trying to understand, why do we have statues of Buddhas? Buddha is not a god. Buddha is not worshipped as a god. Buddha is emulated as a being who sat still and realized the nature of his mind. So it's, in some ways, I'm flirting just the way White Tara practice is flirting, and understanding the Buddhists are flirting constantly with theism and non-theism as part of the skillful means of our practice traditions is a way to join a conversation about ritual that otherwise maybe people think Buddhists wouldn't join in at all.
Thank you. That was such a beautiful and wise distillation. As someone that's read a few of your books, I so appreciate your ability, as we would say in Hebrew, al regel echad, while standing on one foot, to offer that insight and to do it so graciously and in a disarming way, to help us understand that term flirtation and the movement, the flow that you evoke is really quite powerful.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Amichai, I want to come back to where you are now and what you're doing. Tell us a little about this experience of trying to help accompany and perhaps even facilitate and participate in this grieving process. What has that been like, in that beautiful bucolic setting, since we're all groping and grappling and trying to understand how to be and how to mark time and loss and even joy amidst so much pain and suffering. If you could share something about the experience of the last few days, I think it would be powerful.
Thank you. I think something we're all learning is that the agility and the not flexibility exactly, but the way of saying, again, I'll go back to the weaning metaphor. What's essence and what's not? How do we keep to what's essence, and how do we know that some of the ways by which we practice our rituals just might not work right now because we're on a screen and not together? So what does one insist on, and what does one invite for, and what does one let go of with a sigh, but with a kind sigh? I saw something that popped up on my screen the other day, yesterday, that the Pew report came out last week about the participation of people in these last months in religious services, that 17% of Jews participated in some kind of religious ritual, a number far lower than Christians. And I didn't see specifications of other religions. It just noted Christians and Jews. I'm sure the Pew report was more comprehensive than that headline. But the little blurb about it was that such a high percentage of America's Orthodox Jews don't participate on Zoom or on online during the Sabbath. So you have a huge swath of people who want to practice their own personal and collective rituals and prayers, but don't do so because of religious law, which prevents them coming together technologically. I totally respect, understand. etc. And yet I, like many of you, am blessing the blessings of technology. As somebody who spent these many months alone in my home in Harlem, and knowing that I am in touch with so many people of all ages who are either home alone or in nursing homes or in hospitals or in situations where one needs what our religion has to offer, what all religions have to offer: solace and connection, each other, a breath. And if it means that you gotta, like in my case, shave 70% of the liturgy so we have 30% of liturgy but 70% of connection time in the limited Zoom agility we have, dayenu, good. And so we've taken our Shabbat, and 3 Fridays a month we create something called Shabbasics, which is not a whole Friday night service. It's a half hour of we light candles and raise a glass and eat bread and sing a song and share blessings and meditate, the basics, Shabbasics. Half hour Zoom, then for goodness sake, go unplug. But have that beat, have the daily beat, have the weekly beat, have the holy connection to what we can be agile with. And, there's a verse in Jeremiah that says, Klei gola asilach. When Jeremiah is looking at the exiled of his people, leaving the reality they knew into a reality they did not, of exile and dispersion and a paradigm shift, he said, Zion, prepare yourself, Klei gola, tools of exile, tools for the road. What are you going to pack in your backpack when you need to worship and you need to celebrate life and death and the joy and the awe? And you're not going to have your altar. You might not have your beautiful big alabaster Buddha or your prayer mat or your temple. What then? So I think the agility of us figuring out what are the liturgy we keep and what are the rituals we tweak and how do we still create togetherness, even if it changes the laws, so that we cannot lose the spark of this deep, deep spiritual need right now to combat isolation and our loneliness and our anxiety. So we've been experimenting with the daily soul spa, with our Shabbasics, with, like so many of us, virtual ways of supporting those in grief. And we're now in the last throes of designing the high holiday season of awe that's starting next week, which is going to be where many Jews and those who live with them and love them in our larger community do show up for worship. And that's going to be a heck of a challenge. So I think we're learning, not about lemonade, but about essence and what really needs to be what we sanctify, and what are the tools for this so-called exile that we need to hold on to and keep. There is a triage going on. There is a less is more instruction, and it's a both and, but we need to be very careful with what is it that people need and what will people show up for.
Leslie, are you there?
I am here. I just couldn't find my mute button.
No problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So as we wind down, because it's already 6:20 and I don't want to keep folks hostage too long given the Zoom fatigue factor, I'm just curious to hear a closing thought, something that you learned or something that came to heart or mind or something that's been reinforced or something that's been dislodged, over the course of the last hour or so as we've been sharing across our traditions.
So I really want to say thank you to my colleagues on this panel. Everyone brought some measure of beauty, and much of it very simple, some of it relational, traditional, some textual, but all of it really spoke to the need that we have in this moment to find ways of connecting beauty, and having beauty bridge and in some ways salve some of what this moment in our collective life means, whether it's sending light to hurting people or whether it's in some ways a similar idea of actually sort of reaching out and touching our community and checking on one another, like all of it, or keeping practices of covenant, or you know, connecting with the ancient traditions and texts. All of it's really about bringing beauty for the purposes of healing in this moment. And I'm very moved by that. There's something from each person that I feel like I could take. So thank you for having me be a part of this.
Thank you for your generosity and openness. And thank you to your daughter for giving us a little bit of a giggle earlier, just reminding us that flexibility is a part of all of these experiences if they're going to be true and authentic. Hello, beautiful girl.
Say hi.
Judith, I'm curious as we wind down, something you want to take with you on the road, or something that you think we should take with us, speaking, you know, of the image that Amichai brought to us a moment ago from the prophet.
In Buddhist tradition, we speak about the importance of understanding interdependence, that none of us are really as separate and alone as we often think we are. Our thoughts about that really get in the way. And thinking about the isolation that Amichai, you talked about, of being alone in your home in Harlem, how many of us have spent so much time isolated, and yet the pandemic has brought such an incredible sense of interconnection, how it's influenced each of us, every one of us here, everyone in the entire world, everyone on every continent is being influenced by the pandemic. And so this is such a call to really connect on a heart level with that interdependence with everyone else, and recognize that that connection can really bring a greater sense of human capacity to love and to feel part of something much bigger. So that's really the core of compassion practice in Buddhism, and that pandemic has allowed us all to feel that kind of very special, very tangible connection we have with each other. I'm very grateful for being with all of you today, and grateful to you, Or, for inviting us and organizing this wonderful event.
My pleasure. Thank you. Amichai, your parting word.
I feel like just sitting in silence for a couple of minutes with this beautiful room of people. Can we do that?
We can do that. Before we do that, I just want to thank all of you. Casper had to step away, but has sent us the text from his covenant to share with everyone, and we'll send it out to anyone and everyone who registered. Thank you to Leslie. Thank you to Judith. Thank you to Amichai. Thank you to our partners. And thank you to everyone who joined us to create this, this holy field of connectivity. We'll sit quietly, and then I may give into the urge of one little nigun as we part company. Shalom, 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 yehi shalom. With that, I want to wish everyone greater peace, greater wholeness, health, safety, connection, love, and beauty. And thank you so much for joining us. Be well, everyone.